Hey, I'm Tor and I'm an engineer at Statsig. Today, I'm going to be diving into the differences between our client and server SDKs. But first, let's look at the common interface that all of our SDKs expose. It all starts with the initialize method. Calling initialize gives Statsig a chance to set up the SDK for all of your future calls. After Statsig is set up, you can call checkGate to get the value of a feature gate, getConfig to get the value of a dynamic config, or getExperiment to get the group of values associated with a user for the experiment. Finally, you can log events to Statsig, which will eventually be used to analyze the performance of your features and experiments. Now, let's turn to the client SDKs in particular. In this diagram, your app is running on the left-hand side with the Statsig client SDK running inside of it. Now let's work our way from top to bottom. First, you'll make a call to initialize and pass in whatever you know about the current user. The user may be logged out and you know nothing about them, or you can pass in whatever attributes you have about the current logged in user. Statsig servers will then evaluate every single feature gate, dynamic config, and experiment for that user and pass the results back to the SDK. Now, each subsequent call to checkGate, getConfig, and getExperiment will use those cached values. Finally, you can log events to Statsig, which will be batched and periodically flushed to Statsig servers. In this model, you can see that there is a single user during the entire SDK session. We also refer to this as a single user environment. Now let's turn to look at its Statsig server SDK. This time, the left-hand side represents your web server, which is running and using a Statsig server SDK. When you make the call to initialize, the SDK will fetch a set of rules which define each of your feature gates, dynamic configs, and experiments. When you make the call to actually check a gate, get a config, or get an experiment, you will pass in the user for that request. Finally, you can log events to Statsig, but you must also pass the user along with those requests. They'll still be batched and periodically flushed to Statsig servers. Now you can see why we refer to our server SDKs as SDKs for multi-user environments. The user is not the same for each of the calls because your web server is serving requests for your entire user base. As you can see, there are a few structural differences between our client and server SDKs. Please keep this in mind as you get started with your project, and happy coding!